In 1956, Soviet engineers digging in East Berlin found something that had no business being there. A tunnel, 450 meters long, running directly beneath Soviet military headquarters, lined wall to wall with American equipment, and, at the far end, a room full of recording devices. Still running. They had been tapped for 11 months. What the Soviets never announced, what they couldn't announce, was that they had known about the tunnel before a single shovel broke the ground. They knew the location, the target cable, the cover story, the entire timeline. They let the Americans dig anyway. West Berlin, 1954. The city was split down the middle like a wound that refused to close. On the western side sat American bases, NATO infrastructure, the full machinery of the free world. On the eastern side, Soviet troops, Stasi informants, and somewhere beneath the streets, a buried telephone cable carrying Soviet military communications all the way to Moscow. Troop deployments, nuclear positioning, operational orders. Every conversation the Red Army needed no one to hear, running through a single wire under the city. The CIA had one idea. Reach it. The plan required solving 3 problems at the same time. First, getting close enough to the border without triggering Soviet surveillance. Second, digging 450 meters of tunnel beneath an enemy-controlled city without anyone noticing where all that excavated soil was going. And third, tapping 600 live phone lines simultaneously without interrupting service long enough to set off a fault alarm. Each one of those problems was considered nearly impossible on its own. The CIA solved all 3. They built a fake radar installation near Altglienik, a quiet corner of the American sector close to the border. From the outside, it looked like routine military infrastructure. From the inside, engineers had already started digging east. Every night, removing soil in carefully measured amounts, redistributing it so aerial reconnaissance wouldn't pick up a spoil heap. The tunnel was reinforced with prefabricated steel rings, carried in piece by piece. The tapping chamber at the far end was climate-controlled to protect the equipment. By any measure of engineering, it was extraordinary, and every single detail had already been handed to the enemy. January 1954. The planning conference. CIA officers, MI6 officers, engineers, analysts. The full blueprint of the operation laid out in a room in London. The location, the depth, the target cable, the timeline, the cover facility. The kind of meeting where you brief only the people who need to know and trust that the room stays sealed. One of the men in that room was George Blake, senior MI6 officer. Decorated, completely trusted. He had survived the Korean War, endured 2 years in a North Korean prison camp, come home, and earned a promotion. He was also working for the KGB. Within 48 hours of that meeting, Blake handed his Soviet handler everything. The tunnel's starting point, its target, its cover, its full timeline, the entire operation, before one brick of the radar installation had been laid. The KGB read the file, and then they made a decision that required genuine nerve. They decided to do nothing. If the Soviets moved the cable, if they flooded the route, if they did anything at all to stop the tunnel, the CIA would know their planning conference had been compromised. They would investigate. They would find Blake. And Blake, embedded inside British intelligence with access to operations across 3 continents, was worth infinitely more than one cable. So the Soviets waited. They watched the radar installation go up. They waited while the tunnel crept east, meter by meter, night after night. They waited while the tap went in on 600 live lines. They waited while American analysts sat underground with headphones and reel-to-reel recorders, listening to Soviet officers talk, believing every word they heard was real and unguarded. For 11 months, 443,000 conversations. The CIA thought it was reading the Soviet mind. The Soviets were deciding what it read. Not all of it was managed, and that's what made the deception so effective. Troop rotations, administrative logistics, personnel records, the ordinary noise of a military bureaucracy. All of it came through genuine and unfiltered. The Americans needed real intelligence to trust the source. The Soviets needed the tap to look clean, or the Americans would stop using it. So they gave them enough truth to make the lies invisible. Any conversation that touched something that actually mattered, strategic positioning, nuclear protocol, agent identities, those were quietly rerouted before they reached the chamber. What the CIA recorded was real, just not the conversations that could do any damage. The agency believed it had achieved the deepest penetration of Soviet communications in Cold War history. What it had was an 11-month conversation the Soviets had agreed to have. April 21st, 1956. Soviet engineers arrived at a site in East Berlin, reporting a routine cable fault. They dug, and then they stopped because they had found the tunnel entrance. They didn't rush. They documented everything. They photographed. They walked the full length of the tunnel and cataloged the equipment. The amplifiers, the recorders, the tapping arrays, still running. At the far end of the chamber, someone had mounted a small sign. CIA Dark Humor, left behind by the officer who ran the operation. It read, "You are now entering the American sector." The Soviets invited the international press. They gave tours. They published photographs of American engineering running beneath Soviet streets. They expected humiliation. What they got was a news cycle that praised the CIA's audacity. The operation looked bold, innovative, a testament to American technical capability. The fact that it had failed completely was buried inside the story of how impressive it was to attempt. The KGB had not planned for that. George Blake kept his position inside MI6 until 1961. 5 more years. By the time a defecting Polish intelligence officer gave his name to British counterintelligence, Blake had compromised hundreds of Western agents. The exact number has never been made public. Some were arrested. Some were executed. At his trial, he received 42 years, the longest sentence handed down by a British court in the 20th century. The judge stated that each year represented the life of one agent Blake had betrayed. In 1966, he escaped from Wormwood Scrubs prison, was smuggled across Europe inside a camper van by a network of peace activists, and surfaced in Moscow. He was awarded the Order of Lenin. He gave lectures at the KGB Training Academy for the next 3 decades. He died in 2020 at 98 years old in a Moscow dacha and described his life as one without regret. Here is the final accounting. The CIA spent 6 years and millions of dollars building the most technically sophisticated intelligence operation of the Cold War. They solved engineering problems that had never been solved before. They tapped 600 lines simultaneously with 0 service interruption. They ran a covert recording station beneath enemy territory for nearly a year without operational detection. And a man with a memory and a dead drop location ended it before the first shovel touched the ground. Because that's what Operation Gold actually proved. Not that the CIA wasn't capable. Not that the engineering failed. It proved that the most fortified secret is only as secure as the people who know it. You can harden a border, encrypt a cable, bury a tunnel 9 meters underground. But you cannot protect a plan from the person sitting across the table who has already decided the meeting isn't private. The tunnel is still there. You can walk through it today, preserved beneath a quiet Berlin street. 450 meters of Cold War engineering. Built in secret, betrayed in secret, and kept running for 11 months because the enemy decided an open tunnel was more valuable than a closed one. The Americans dug into Soviet territory. The Soviets let them. And for 11 months, the most powerful intelligence agency on Earth listened carefully to exactly what it was supposed to hear.